2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to episode 2 of the PuckPedia Hockey Show. Today we are welcomed by founder and godfather of PuckPedia, Hart Levine. Hart was boots on the ground in LA on Friday and Saturday for the NHL Draft, so we're going to get a full recap from him. He was bumping his arms with agents, maybe getting some insights, understanding some deals behind the scenes that might be agreed to. So Hart's going to give us all that good information, and then we're going to dive into free agency. Mitch Marner's the big fish on the pond in free agency. All this talk of Vegas, Toronto, sign and trades. We're going to get Hart's view on this. We're going to look at how Vegas will be able to fit someone like Mitch Marner on their team, and then we're going to talk about the rest of the free agent crop, maybe a Nikolaj Ehlers, Brad Marchand, who's going to be signing. Hart will be live on Daily Faceoff's live stream on Tuesday at 11 a.m. going over free agency. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen there. And then we're going to finish off the episode with Ask the Capologist. We're going to talk through some of the questions that fans might have, understanding offer sheets, why some restricted free agents can get offer sheeted and others cannot. We're going to talk about just nuances with the salary cap and the CBA, and then the new CBA that was agreed to, how that might change the team's thinking. But we have a great episode coming up with Hart. And without further ado, let's drop the puck. We now welcome on our guest, Hart Levine, founder of PuckPedia. Hart, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Glad to be on the show with you now.
Cool. We're excited to have you. And so Hart is finally on his own PuckPedia Hockey Show. We love that for him. Hart, maybe just give a quick overview of like what PuckPedia is and how it's grown over the last 12 months. I feel like a lot of people in the hockey space you see online now, they're all referencing PuckPedia. So kind of what is it and like what have you been able to build with your business?
Yeah. Well, we launched PuckPedia in 2018, so it's a lot of people are finding it for the first time over the last year. But been around and grinding at it for a long time, so it's super exciting to have more people checking us out and seeing what we have. And really, the goal for PuckPedia is to be the one-stop shop for hockey fans and people that work in the game. So we have salary cap information, player contracts, and nowadays with the salary cap, if you want to think about trades and transactions and what your team should be doing, you have to factor in the salary cap information. So that, really, we think about like a fan is sitting with his buddies arguing about why they're smarter than the team's GM. And so the goal for the site is just give that fan all the tools that they need, everything that a GM has, so that they can make all those same decisions and talk about like why they would make better decisions than their favorite team's GM. So, have it all in one place, have those tools and make it really interactive. That's the whole goal for the site.
Definitely. And a lot of features have been built out over the last, 6 to 12 months too. I know Puck GM is a big popular tool online where fans can go in, rebuild their team's rosters, create a new roster from scratch, do mock trades, mock signings, offer sheets, you name anything a GM can do, Puck GM is able to replicate. And so I think a lot of that is pretty cool. And you see all the pictures and the screenshots too, even the lineup depth charts. I think during the playoffs, a lot of people were referencing those though. So it's just cool to see the PuckPedia's kind of grown and fans are now becoming more smarter and intelligent about why their teams are making certain moves.
Yeah, we had a long wish list of things to build out, and then, when all of a sudden there was a lot more attention on us last summer, made the decision here, let's just go really fast and let's take some stuff that I thought might take a few years to build out and let's get it built in a couple months, and then let's just keep adding and adding. So yeah, the site's really changed a lot over the last year, and even every couple of weeks we keep adding and adding new features, tweaking things, improving some of the layouts. So the latest thing just for free agency, our signings page now, there's a whole bunch of filtering you can do and a couple different views of how you might want to check out that page. So yeah, if you've been to PuckPedia, just keep coming back because there's going to be new things added and some new updates.
Yeah, and free agency for the NHL begins on Tuesday, July 1st. Hart will actually be on the Daily Faceoff live show during free agency, breaking down all the trades. They're going to be quick panning to him, getting that contract information that Hart's able to get from a lot of different agents or other execs. Sometimes that helps out everything, and Hart's able to filter that information to the live stream as it's happening in real time. So I'm sure Hart's pretty excited about that. We're excited to have him on that stream.
Yeah, it'll be great to get to talk about things in real time, and while still trying to, do my normal free agency work of getting all the information and verifying it and getting it up and posted. So, really grateful now as we've grown. I've got a team of great people on PuckPedia that can help do all of that. So yeah, now I'm freed up a bit to chat and talk about what I think about some of the signings.
Yeah, and puckpedia.com will be the resource you want to reference on Tuesday when free agency begins. Before we talk about a little free agency deep dive, let's go into the draft that happened on Friday and Saturday. Over the weekend, Hart was boots on the ground in Los Angeles. I want to get your take too on what you thought of the decentralized draft format before we get into a couple of the bigger moves that happened on draft day.
Well, definitely. I mean, you notice the energy was different, not having the tables and being able to look at people talking and mingling. Normally, like the hour before the first round starts, there's just like huge buzz of all the executive mingling around, and then fans and media standing around watching the mingling. That was obviously missing, and there's the atmosphere was just significantly different. It's hard to compare the Sphere because that was such a spectacle, but even previous drafts, the atmosphere was quite a bit different. And I'm sure on TV it seemed a little painful how long it took between draft or between picks, but also having GMs have to tell the player why they drafted them in person. It was even more painful. Like every time they would get the GM to answer that question, you could hear a groan in the audience. Like it's imagine you're at any job and you have to sit around the boardroom table and say why you like the people there, why you hired them. It's just like really uncomfortable. So, and I don't even know if I guess that's partly a function of the decentralized because the GMs weren't there. But I mean, they might still have that idea to do in person and make the GM like stare the prospect in the face and in the eye and answer that question. So hopefully they realize that wasn't a good idea. And it's just the time between picks, especially in the first round. Like it's a 3 minute clock, but we can see the clock there in person. They don't start the 3 minutes until several minutes after the pick. Like there's no reason why they can't speed all that up. I think last year the first round was in like 3.5 hours, so there's no reason it needs to go as long as it did, and it just kind of sucks a little bit of the atmosphere out. But it's still great to see the prospects there. They did a really cool red carpet thing, and you could see the kids and their families so excited and taking pictures. And afterwards, seeing the kids in their jerseys walking around and having a burger after wearing their new team jersey with their family around. It's really cool, and that's the part that's just really feel really fortunate to see and check out and be close to because all of us we played hockey growing up or dreamed about playing hockey, and it all started with hoping to be drafted one day and then playing the NHL. So it's just a great reminder of it's a great sport and how passionate people are playing it.
Definitely. There were some good prospect moments. Obviously, Matthew Schaefer getting drafted first overall. Very emotional
Yeah.
for him with his mother passing. And the Islanders had a great touch. They had the pink cancer ribbon on his jersey already with his mom's initials. So I thought that was a great touch. And then obviously Meredith Gaudreau there announcing the Columbus Blue Jackets pick. Just another really good moment. Even having Adam Sandler in the Boston Bruins jersey announcing the James Hagens pick, I thought was a really cool moment. But you're right, there were some clunkiness of it. And it was the first time that they did it. But the NHL just sometimes finds ways to try and do too much when they don't really need to. And sometimes a simpler process is a better process. But we'll see what happens next year. It sounds like they might undecentralize it and go back to in person. So I'm excited to see if that kind of changes. But to my point too, on the draft, we thought that the decentralized version would lead to more moves in the first round, and we didn't really see much of action once the draft actually started of teams changing picks in the first round. I think for the most part, they pretty much stayed where they were.
Yeah, there was a lot of like action, and talking to people of them trying to. Like obviously we see the results. There was yet again barely any movement of picks, especially the first half of the first round. And it seems like every year there's buzz that teams will move around and then they don't. So that's definitely a constant letdown. But I know for sure this year there were teams. You had a lot of teams with multiple first round picks that were really pushing, and it's no secret the Islanders were trying to move to get down. I think Pittsburgh was trying to move to get down as well with their 2 picks. So yeah, there was a lot of teams trying, and I think a lot of it was just the way the draft board fell. Guys didn't want to move back and miss out on who they like. Like I think that Philly really liked Martone, and so when he was there, like that, got in the way of any moves. And I believe Utah really liked Brady Martin. Those are some of the spots that maybe could have sorry, that was Nashville with Brady Martin. So I think those are some of the spots we could have seen some movement, but yeah, just I guess the way the dominoes fell led to kind of another dud of no action.
Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, too, right? There was a big move that happened during the day of the draft. So Noah Dobson got signed and traded to the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for Emil Heineman and 2 first-round picks, 16 and 17, that Montreal had both owned. And then Noah Dobson signed an 8-year, $9.5 million annual cap hit extension. I think it's $76 million. So any thoughts on that deal and what you thought? Because at the time it seemed like the Islanders weren't willing to pay over $10 million, which is what Noah's Dobson's camp was allegedly asking for. But then he clearly settled for less than that with the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, it's interesting, like specifically starting with the contract. Like, I think Dobson and Evan Bouchard are always going to be closely linked. They were drafted very close to each other. Their points their points per game has been very similar at times. Dobson was a little bit ahead earlier in his career. You saw when Bouchard signed his last bridge deal, it was kind of had to be a touch below Dobson's, because at that point Dobson was a little ahead. And I think clearly, and then the last couple of years now, Bouchard's way ahead. Bouchard also needs a new contract. He has one more year of restricted free agency than Dobson would have. Dobson was 1 year away. But it's interesting to just see how that will work out. Like, you hear a lot of talk now, Bouchard's going to be potentially a 3 or 4 year deal and around 10, whereas Dobson was 8 years to get 9.5. So that'll be interesting to see that comparison. I think anytime you have a highly thought of player that's only 1 year from unrestricted free agency, they have a lot of power. It's almost like they're not at free agency, but it's almost like pre-agency, because if Dobson didn't like the offer from the Islanders, he can file for arbitration, take a 1 year award, at a pretty good number too, because he has points, and then next year be an unrestricted free agent, and the Islanders have nothing. So even as you think about like a player, the relationship with the team, it starts where the team has all the leverage, the player has very little rights other than like just don't sign. And as you move along, they start to get arbitration rights, and then as you get to where he has 1 year from unrestricted free agency, he had a lot of power. And if he didn't like the number, I really think it made sense then to trade him now, because waiting and potentially risking arbitration or even an offer sheet, you weren't going to get the kind of package. So I think the Islanders did quite well with that, and then I think they did even better than they expected. I think when they made the trade, they were looking to bundle those picks and move down to get Higgins, but that didn't work out. I think the guys that they got at 16 and 17, Ekblad and Aitchison,
I love their
you know,
picks.
I don't follow the prospects that closely, but just like the people that I read that do follow it, yeah, those players were ranked a little bit high, or like should have expected to go before that, and to get both of them there, two potentially steal players. I think, yeah, it really reframes how you look at it. If you thought maybe it was sort of a fair deal, I think you start to really like it from the Islanders side a little bit more once you see the result. Which is, again, it's also using hindsight, you kind of have to evaluate the trade when it was made. But I think it's a good, it's a potentially good win-win. I think the Islanders were stuck in that mushy middle, and while Matthew Darche came in and it sounded like they weren't going to take a step back, I maybe just taking a closer look and realizing what was best for the franchise, and just maybe Dobson forced his hand a little bit. It's probably a better outcome than trying to like keep the team together and add a little bit. Taking a small step back, getting 3 really, really good young players that are going to potentially be Islanders for a long time makes a lot of sense. And for Montreal, they have so many picks, they have a lot of prospects. I think they needed this kind of dynamic right shot defenseman still in his prime, and now going to be with them for 8 years. I think they're in their life cycle where they should be taking a big swing like this. And Dobson maybe had a bit of a down year, but he's still, what his floor is, and it's quite good. And if he gets even higher, then it becomes even more of a home run. So yeah, I mean, we see a lot of deals where it seems like one team won, one team lost. We also see some of the rare lose deals, but this might be one of the rare win-wins.
Yeah, this feels like a deal where both sides can really benefit from this. To your point, too, when we had Jason Bukala on that previous episode, he was really raving about Aitchison, who's one of the 2 picks that the Islanders took with Montreal's picks. So I think that guy was really, he had him ranked like 11th or 12th. So they got some value on that. They see him, he could be a good like a top 4 pairing defenseman. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You never know with prospects, right? That's part of the fun of seeing this. Is they develop, and sometimes they turn into stars, sometimes they don't. So So it's all risk and gambles, and that's kind of what this deal was. So they got him on a 9.5 million AAV. What would that offer sheet compensation have looked like if the Montreal Canadiens sent him an offer sheet with the same exact AAV?
Well, one thing to keep in mind with offer sheets that the compensation is based on 5 years. So if even though it was 8 times 9.5, you have to take the total amount that was paid and you have to divide that by 5. So that would put it, into the 4 first round pick territory. But if you just let's just say the offer sheet would have been like 4 times 9.5, that moves right into the threshold that's 9.36 or more, which is 2 firsts, a second, and a third. So let's say it's 2 firsts, a second, and a third. Those aren't going to be in the same draft, obviously, right? Those are in future drafts, and that would be after this year's draft. So you're waiting many years to get them, and who knows where they're going to be. If it's a good team, you're talking later than where they ended up in the mid-teens. So I think that return of the 2 firsts now, where you're going to get those players in your pipeline in the mid-teens. I think that's better than trying to get that offer sheet compensation.
Definitely, and like we mentioned, all you can find all this stuff right on Puckpedia's website. That's the one-stop shop resource. Everything you need that they have is available to fans, which is very beneficial. So now that we got a draft recap, let's dive into free agency. So free agency launches for NHL on Tuesday, July 1st. Let's talk about the biggest deal that we have to talk about. The biggest free agent on the board right now is Mitch Marner. There's been some reports that came out today that Vegas is potentially tampering, trying to lock down a deal early on with Mitch Marner. And then now that the Leafs know that there's potential tampering, they might be trying to leverage that into some sort of sign and trade situation. I saw Puckpedia had kind of reposted what Steve Worrier, former AGM of the Florida Panthers, had posted about just different leverage legacy situations. So I would love to talk about this Mitch Marner situation, and one, just what you think, where you think he's going to go, what you think about all this tampering kind of reporting, and two, like, what is a team getting with Mitch Marner? Who's going to be able to fit this guy under their cap, right? He's going to be a pretty expensive contract. And then some people seem to suggest he's not going to go for a long-term deal here, and maybe he does more of a 3 or 4 year deal.
Yeah, well, that's what was the most surprising. The last thing you said is, all the reports had been a 3 or 4 year deal. And so then the question is, well, why would you do a sign and trade with Toronto? Like, the advantage for doing a sign and trade is only Toronto can sign him to a contract that has 8 years, and that would have to be signed by midnight on the 30th. So, that is one reason to do a sign and trade. Really, or traditionally, the only reason to do a sign and trade is to get that 8th year. So that was the big surprise. Well, okay, I guess all of a sudden now he is back to being interested in an 8 year deal or a long-term deal instead of a shorter term deal. So that was definitely caught me off guard when I saw the reports. Because I'd been hearing the same things. And I'd been hearing, all along Vegas seemed like kind of in the number one spot. A team, people kept saying a team that you shouldn't count out is Dallas, even though obviously that would take a lot of work. But there was some mutual interest between both player and team. Um, to get to your tampering question, it's very strange because, as we know, like, a lot of deals are at least broadly discussed prior to July 1st every year. I know last year the NHL sent out a memo and they've reinforced it. There can't be tampering, or you can't work out all the terms. Sure. And let's just say that doesn't happen. But why then is this situation one that they're going to, dig into more than other situations where, again, maybe the whole deal's not worked out, but there's a little bit of an understanding of what the range might be and who's interested. And the fact that now it sounds like Toronto might be trying to almost like blackmail Vegas, that if you don't do a sign and trade with us, like, we're gonna file I don't know what the word would be, like, file charges against you. It's just very strange, and it doesn't feel it just, yeah, it's the typical NHL. It just seems a little strange, and why that situation, just like the talk, not to go off topic, but just the talk, like, all of a sudden they want to look into Evander Kane and the Oilers LTIR use before the playoffs, where it's like, well, teams have been doing it for years, and even multiple teams this last year, so why specifically this one? It's just strange, like, that they're picking on this situation. Maybe it's because it's the most prominent guy. So yeah, I mean, I can't speak to, like, would there be a tampering investigation, or what would happen. I can just say that, people I know around the sport that hear from people that hear from people, have linked those two teams, or linked the Marner and Vegas for a long time. And so however it works out, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the destination. And from a sign and trade perspective, yeah, I mean, again, if I really watch if they do a sign and trade for 8 years, like, okay, it makes sense why it happened. If it's for anything less than 8 years, to me, then it's very strange that we're trying to like leverage a potential tampering, punishment against Vegas to do a deal. Because even if the argument is the report was Nick Waugh was going to be in the trade, then they need to clear cap space anyways. But okay, but there's lots of teams that would take him. They don't have to trade him to Toronto, right? So it's a very interesting and strange situation to watch, and then the NHL soap opera goes on.
Definitely. And like that's part of the fun for fans, right? Is the soap opera aspect of it. I think the drama is what keeps people enticed. So let's say that Mitch does go to Vegas. If we can pull up the roster here, I was looking on PuckPedia's website. So right now, Vegas has approximately only $5 million in cap space right now, $5.6 million, with the cap hitting $95.5 million as the upper ceiling next year. If they were to make a move for Mitch Marner, they obviously would have to move some money out. But then there also was a report today that Alex Pietrangelo is potentially prepared to not be able to play at all in 25-26. He potentially might have career-ending surgeries where he might not play again. So if Vegas were to sign Mitch Marner without moving any money out, what would they be able to do with that Pietrangelo contract? Like, can they just put him on LTIR? Like how does that all play out? Give us the cap mechanisms that maybe the casual fan wouldn't understand here.
Yeah, I mean, from the moment Vegas was eliminated, there'd been lots of talk that Petrangelo was going to be out for the season. So that's not a surprise. And so we have some articles on Puckpedia where you can read the full details on how LTIR gets set and how it works. But at a high level, by putting a player on LTIR, you can potentially exceed the cap by up to that player's cap hit. So when we say that they have $5.6 million of space, if they put Petrangelo's 8.8 on, they can potentially exceed the cap by that amount. And so you can kind of add that to their potential cap space. And that's at this point of the year, that's kind of in theory. Teams can go over the cap by 10% in the offseason. So they don't really need to actually put someone on an LTR. What they would do is they'd wait until this opening roster submission, which happens right before the first game start of the regular season. That's when they have to move rosters around. And to optimize an LTIR to be able to, and so in this case, for Vegas to be able to actually exceed the cap by Petrangelo's 8.8 million, they have to put a roster together that's over the cap by almost that amount. And so that's something we could watch for. But as we saw, like Nick Waugh is potentially in the deal. So let's say Marner's at like 13 million or so. That leaves them like 7 million over. You trade out Waugh though at 3 million. Okay, so now they're only 4 million over, and then that's now where they're kind of like stuck in the middle. They either need to submit a roster that is completely under the cap to start the season, and then put Pietrangelo on, or be over the cap by almost up to his cap hit. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing. We know Vegas is never shy, and they, historically use their cap space to like the last dollar. They're one of the best teams. I would put them in Tampa. When they have players on LTR, making those roster moves so that they can squeeze every last potential dollar out of it. Kind of keep a standings every year of who is able to set their LTIR to get as much out of it as possible. And I know among the capologists in the league, they like to get those standings from me every year. And it's, there's been years where both Vegas and Tampa are within like $1 of the complete optimal capture. So that's what we would look to see. That Vegas is going to build a roster that's either just under the cap before the first day of the season, and then put them on LTR and then be able to exceed the cap, or they would submit a roster that is almost as entire 8.8 million over the cap.
Yeah, that's great insight there, Hart. Because fans understand the cap generally speaking, but there's these mechanisms like LTIR, which we can get to in a second. Won't be able to kind of leverage as much in the playoffs as they had in the past with the new CBA being agreed to for the 26-27 season. But it'll be interesting. We're excited for free agency. I think it's a fun day for hockey fans. It's a good day for sites like Puckpedia too. There's going to be unfortunately, it's not like a great, I would say, unrestricted free agent class. There's some good RFAs, which one just actually got signed. Matthew Nyes earlier today re-signed with the Maple Leafs for a 6-year deal, $7.75 million AAV and cap hit. But is there anything else like you're kind of hearing about, or just what are your thoughts on how July 1st is going to look? Do we think if Mitch doesn't sign on July 1st, like are other dominoes going to be able to fall, like a Nikolaj Ehlers, who's probably the second best winger on the unrestricted free agency market, or is it kind of going to be wait and see on Mitch and then go from there?
Yeah, it's definitely not the biggest star-studded free agent group, especially on the goalies. There's like one goalie that's at least you could say like a 1B and Jake Allen, right? There's only two goalies when you add Anton Forsberg to the list that finished with an over 900 save percentage last year. So definitely a very thin market for goalies. And then for skaters, yeah, I mean, there's other than Marner, there's not a lot of like big name star power. Nick Ehlers, I think like a couple of weeks ago, the thought was teams that are interested in Marner are also interested in Ehlers, and that could hold things up. But I think now that it really feels like it's Vegas for Marner, maybe Dallas. I think the other teams that had Marner dreams are already pivoting to the next person on their list, which would be an Ehlers. So like I think teams like a Carolina or LA that originally there was a lot of reports that were interested in Marner. I think those teams are both interested in Ehlers, and we could see something there. Again, that might be another opportunity for a sign and trade if a team wants to try and get him for 8 years. Work something out with Winnipeg by June 30th at midnight to do a sign and trade. That'd be something to watch. And then we have a lot of guys that are sort of like second line scoring wingers. We've got Jonathan Duran, Mikael Granlund, Brock Boeser. I think on like really good teams, those aren't your like top scorers, but on really good teams, those could be a second line. Or if they want to go to some of these teams that are trying to get better, that haven't been playoff teams and have a lot of cap space, maybe they are their first line players. We have some defensemen like Aaron Ekblad. I think that's an interesting one to see. Florida can sign Marchand after signing Bennett. What does that look like for Ekblad? He's really the only kind of top end right shot D out there, and so there'll definitely be a market for him. So yeah, in terms of like the free agency market, not the most exciting group. I think that it's we've seen in past years there's just so many players signing long-term extensions, and that really brings down the market. And potentially the CBA change that we've heard about, where the term limits are going to shrink. It'll take some time. Obviously, we're going from like 8 and 7 year deals to 7 and 6 year deals. But maybe when we're doing this podcast, 5, 6, 10 years from now, there'll be a lot more names out there because you just have like 1 year less of people locked up and getting back to the market.
Hart wants this podcast running for 5, 6, maybe 10 years now. So
That's right.
I'll note that for future. But yeah, like you mentioned, the new CBA is ratified. 26-27 season will be the first season it's intact. You mentioned the term limit on contracts is one thing, down 1 year from 8 years for a team that owns the free agent to 7 years, and then 6 years for all others. There's also minimum salaries being increased a little bit, which also means that the amount you can bury in the minor leagues is also increased. You can't do a double retention on trades. So there are some interesting mechanisms in the new CBA that could impact how teams are approaching free agency and beyond this year. Maybe they want to get it all out of their system now. And like we mentioned too, the playoff pool, I don't know if it's been fully finalized on how that's going to look in the playoffs versus for the LTIR, and you can't exceed the salary cap of a certain amount, whether it's the roster team or people on the lineup. But I think something like that is going to be in effect. They haven't, I don't think, explicitly said, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, well, right now we're just relying on the great reporting from Chris Johnson, Pierre LeBrun, and Frank Saravalli. At some point we'll get access to the memorandum of understanding and dig into it, and I'm sure we'll have some episodes really getting into the details. But I think, like for now, yeah, one of the interesting things and how you might see an impact, on this July 1st and over the coming months is the term limit. So, we're going from now where a player can sign for 8 years with their team or 7 years with the new team, and starting next July 1, that shrinks to 7 and 6. So if you're a player that has 1 year left on your contract and your team is offering you an 8 year extension right now, your options really are: I could take an 8 year extension from my team like now, or next summer I can only get 6 on the open market. So we have this window where actually it's a 2 year difference in years what you can get from your team versus going to the market for these players with 1 year left on their deal. So I think that's really something to like watch. watch for and think about. And we might see even more 8-year deals, over the next few months than we may have seen without this change, just as players are seeing that there's such a big difference in money available. That's definitely one to watch. And then, yeah, with the league minimum salary going up from the current 775 to 1 million over the 4 years, it goes up gradually over that time. The bearing threshold increases, and the bearing threshold is the maximum amount of cap hit that can be saved if a player is sent down. So right now that threshold is 1.15 million. So if a player that has a cap hit lower than that gets sent down, there's no cap charge to the team. And if a player has a cap hit more than that, then just 1.15 million is saved. So, for example, if a player has a $1.25 million cap hit and they get sent down, the team is left with a $100,000 cap charge while they're in the minors. So, as the minimum salary is going to go up, 225,000, the bearing threshold will go up by that same amount. And so that might be something else where we see, bigger name guys get sent to the minors because there's more cap savings for the team. I don't think that's necessarily something that the PA loves, but it's just kind of one of the unintended consequences potentially of trying to get a higher minimum salary. It'll also be interesting to see. We haven't seen any details yet on what's going to happen with entry level deals. Like, one of the things that have happened recently is that the maximum entry level deal amount is like tighter than it used to be to the league minimum salary. So you have just so many players kind of like in that small band. So it'll be interesting to see if the entry level ranges increase more. Like, let's say, while the minimum goes to $1 million, maybe entry levels go up to 1.5 or even more. You have a little bit more of a wider range, and that might mean that the older veteran players on a league minimum salary maybe are more likely to get a job at a training camp than the higher picks that have kind of the maximum entry level salary. So that's just another thing to watch. There's a lot of details still to come out, so I'm definitely going to be excited to dig into it.
This is Hart's Super Bowl when they announce a new CBA, because then him and Taylor get to go through the 500, 1,000 page document and kind of sift through all this information and then regurgitate that to the fans who are using PuckPedia's site, making sure all the tools are in place and the calculations are accurate. Because, like we mentioned, all these small changes don't sound crazy, but it changes completely how a team thinks about these moves. And then we're going to be able here to explain why the teams are doing that. So I think that's all great. And then before we go to our Ask the Capologist, one final question I have for you on free agency. Is there a most interesting team you have that you're thinking about is going to kind of either make a splash or do some things that are maybe that you wouldn't expect and that might be under the radar now, that on July 1 or even like a week later that you're like, wow, that team made a lot of moves and kind of reshaped their team a little bit?
That's a good question. I mean, I think one team that has the potential to do a lot of things is Vancouver, but from what I'm hearing, there actually looks like they're going to be extending some of their players. I'm expecting Connor Garland to sign an extension. I think there's a really good chance Thatcher Demko signs an extension. So that's a team that kind of had the opportunity for a little bit of chaos and getting into it, but looks like they're going to be locking in some of their players longer term, which then potentially takes them off the board for some things, although I still think they'll be active. I think Pittsburgh is the one that you really have to watch. They're really the only true sellers that kind of recognize that they will likely have less points in the standings than last year. And there will be many teams that happens to, but right now they don't plan for that, or they're not expecting it. It'll be a disappointment. So when that's the case, you have a lot of power. And so I think, there's a decent market for guys like Rust, Raquel, even like Achari, potentially Eric Carlson, although I'm not so sure about him. So Pittsburgh's going to be in the middle of it. Kyle Dubas likes to wheel and deal anyways. So they'll be interesting. And then there's a couple teams that they just have so much cap space. And some of them just even get to the floor. They have a lot to spend. I mean, if we just look on Puckpedia, like some of the teams, the Sharks, they only have 50 million right now committed. The Ducks, 60 million, even after that big Ville Husso $2.2 million cap hit deal. The Blue Jackets have a lot. And then the Hurricanes, for a really good team, conference finalist team, they've got 27 million. So they're going to definitely be in the mix for some players. So even the Kings, I mean, they got a new GM. Famously in Edmonton, Holland said he doesn't invest in green bananas, meaning like he's in for a short term, not a long term situation. So I think they're going to really be in the mix as well. So yeah, I think this is all going to lead to players getting contracts in free agency that you're really surprised they got that much. Then that's a function of space and the cap going up so much. And then I think there's going to be players that are much easier to move than you expected, that typically maybe teams would have to attach assets to move when cap space was tight. But now there's so many teams that want to get better. They'll just, take a player, even if he's a bit overpaid, but if they have the space, they're still a player that maybe moves the needle over what their potential last player on the roster could provide for them now. And I think we'll see more of the traditional like hockey trades of like a forward for a D and a D for a forward, not so many players for futures like we would normally see. So it's definitely a different market than we've seen in past years as a function of the cap going up now finally and teams with some space.
Yeah, well, things are shaping up to be an exciting time for a hockey fan. Off season's in full swing now. We have the draft completed. Free agency starts up on Tuesday. Hart will be live on Daily Faceoff's free agency stream. Very exciting times. I think that starts at noon Eastern, probably, right, Hart?
We are starting at 11 Eastern.
Oh, 11 a.m. Even
Yeah,
earlier for Hart 'cause he's on the West
yeah,
Coast, but
yeah.
he'll get some beauty sleep the night before and he'll be ready to go. So exciting times. Let us wrap up this episode here with Ask the Capologist. So we want to just dive into we're gonna have 3 questions on the screen here, and we're gonna talk about just simple answers that maybe the casual fans don't understand with hockey, with the salary cap, free agency, all that stuff. And we just want to inform our fans a little bit, and we have no one better than Hart to kind of explain that for us. So let's just dive right into these questions here. So the first one, and you can ask these questions on PuckPedia's website. I think if you go into the Capology section of the website, you can just submit the question. Hart gets a ton of these questions, so we tried to pick out 3 of the best questions and 3 of the most asked questions that we thought would be just helpful for us to answer here. So let's get into this. Question number 1, Hart. What is a qualifying offer? How is it calculated? And does a player have to sign it if they are qualified?
It's a great time for that question. The qualifying offers are due on June 30th at 5 p.m. Eastern. So for a restricted free agent, in order for a team to keep their rights, they must submit a qualifying offer. If they do not submit the qualifying offer, the player then becomes an unrestricted free agent and can sign with anybody. So the qualifying offer must be provided. They're very rarely accepted. The way that the qualifying offer is calculated, it's based on the last year's compensation in the player's contract. And so if a player makes under $1 million, the qualifying offer has to be a 5% increase over what their last base salary was. If a player makes $1 million or more, it has to be equal to 100% of what they last made. So a player might have a $5 million cap hit, but if their salary in the last year was 5.2, then their qualifying offer must be 5.2. And one change that came out of the last CBA was that the maximum qualifying offer is, even if the player's compensation is much higher in the final year, the maximum qualifying offer would be 120% of the cap hit. So when we have contracts that have a much higher final year salary than the cap hit, even if that might indicate that the qualifying offer should be higher, it's capped at 120% of the cap hit. So that's how it's calculated. They get submitted to players. Again, typically the only players that would accept it is if they don't think that they're going to get a better offer than that. So you might see that for kind of like minor league players that are just excited to get another NHL contract, and they'll accept it. Or you might see it with players that are close to free agency. We talked about Noah Dobson, for example. Let's say that this is not the case with him because he had a lower contract, but let's just say he was coming off like an $8 million contract. He might just take his 1 year qualifying offer because that's a 1 year contract, and then he hits unrestricted free agency next year. So those are the other kind of players that would accept it. So it's typically if a player, the qualifying offer is kind of like a little bit more than he's worth, and he doesn't think he's going to get more in arbitration anyways, might accept it. Now the offers do expire. Teams can extend them in writing. So sometimes again they'll leave it out there for a player. They might say this is our best offer anyways, so we'll extend it for you. But that's how qualifying offers work. So we'll have a list of guys on the site on June 30th after 5 p.m. that did not get qualified, and you'll see that their contract expiry status has moved from RFA to a UFA without a qual because they didn't get a qualifying offer. We call it a UFA no QO on the site. If you go to the player dashboard, you can filter and see all the guys that meet that. And every year there's a number of quite decent players. In some cases, it's that the teams just don't want to risk the player filing for arbitration and having a big arbitration award that they're faced with. That's a common reason why a team will not provide a qualifying offer.
Makes sense. Very, very simple answer from Hart there on qualifying offers. Let's get into the next question here. Um, why are some restricted free agents eligible for offer sheets and some aren't?
Yeah, so this is falls into a small little area of what's called a 10.2.c, 10.2c. It's just named after the section in the CBA, which basically talks about in order for a player to officially be an RFA, they must have a certain amount of experience. And it's typically so if they sign their first entry level between ages 18 and 21, they need 3 years of professional experience. And if they sign it 22 to 23, it's 2 years. To be credited with a year of professional experience, they need to play 10 NHL games. And so this is like most players don't fall into this because typically, they sign their entry level deal and they get their experience. If they're 20 and older, it just means they have to play any professional league. It doesn't have to be the NHL. So almost all players are eligible for an offer sheet when they finish their first contract. The ones that don't are typically ones that sign out of college, like partway through the season. So a really good example is Luke Hughes with New Jersey. So he signed at the end of the season. He played a few games that used up a year of his entry level contract, but it didn't officially count as a year of experience towards being officially an RFA. So now that his contract's up, he actually is not even an official RFA, which means he cannot sign an offer sheet. So if you look at his page on PuckPedia, there's a section that says offer sheet eligible, and it says no, he's not offer sheet eligible. One that is a very interesting case is Matthew Nyes. He was looking like he was going to fall into this category and not be offer sheet eligible, but he played that one playoff game in his initial season, which was his 10th NHL game that year, counted as a year of professional experience. And that's the reason why there was all this talk of a potential Nyes offer sheet because he played that 10th game, which happened to be a playoff game, and moved him into that list. So those are really like the key guys. Looking at the list of who are not eligible for an offer sheet, the most notable names would be Devin Levi is one of them, Alex Laferriere, Mackie Semiskevich, and then we mentioned Luke Hughes. Those are probably like the ones that might be surprised to know that they're not eligible for an offer sheet. And obviously, as we know, offer sheets aren't very common at all. Maybe they're going to be a little bit more common, but just not having that threat of it potentially lowers the contract price. So for a guy like Luke Hughes, his only option is sign with New Jersey or not play. He doesn't have that other option of potentially taking an offer sheet.
Definitely. He loses some leverage in that situation. And unfortunately for some of us, is like we're hoping for a big Matthew Nyes offer sheet that was taken from us this morning when Toronto had announced that they re-signed him. Let's get into this last question here. Thanks for that answer, Hart. So the last question is, and you get this one a lot, it's what is the difference between a no move clause and a no trade clause?
Yeah, so no move means a player cannot be traded and they cannot be put on waivers. And what that effectively means then is they can't be sent to the minors. Anyone that to have a clause, you must be eligible for unrestricted free agency. You have to be at that age. So all those players already need waivers to be sent down. So if you have a no move, you can't be sent down without your permission. One other question that we get a lot is some players they'll show is they have a no move and they have a partial no trade clause. Like, why does that happen? What that means is the player cannot be put on waivers, and that's the no move portion. But instead of it being a full no move, which means they also can't be traded, that portion is limited to the modified no trade clause. So if you see a no move clause and he's got a modified no trade clause with a 10-team no trade, he cannot be sent to waivers. He can be traded to any other team other than the 10 teams on his no trade clause. So it's when you see both, it means that kind of the trade protection and the no move has been restricted to that modified trade list.
Yeah, and to me, something that's interesting with the no moves and the no trades, it feels like over the last few years, GMs have been more liberal in handing them out to players who maybe don't necessarily, I wouldn't say they don't deserve them because the agents do a good job in negotiating these deals for their players. But when you're handing out these no moves and these no trades to third and fourth line guys, it really hampers kind of what you're able to do in terms of roster flexibility. And I think some of that is just kind of, it's gone a little extreme in my
Yeah, and I think we've seen too, like maybe not players aren't getting the full no trade clauses, but there are lots of sort of end of roster players that get a partial no trade clause, right? So, and I think it makes sense. Like any negotiation, you can only just say no for so long, and then you want to get a deal done, you got to give something. So, okay, we'll give this third liner a 6-team no trade clause, but you're right, it does limit the flexibility, for sure. The other thing we've been seeing recently, and Carolina loves to do it now, is actually having like conditional no trade clauses. So like Taylor Hall and Eric Robinson, for example, and Freddie Anderson, their deals, like they only get the no trade protection in a year based on their stats the previous year. So that's always been allowed, but like nobody, I guess, cared to be that detailed on a contract. But Carolina obviously likes to have the most complicated, creative contracts out there. So yeah, we're seeing more of those where like you have to score a number of points or play enough games in one year, and then that would trigger that you get a no trade the following season.
That's what happens when your front office is run by a PhD, borderline rocket scientist.
Exactly.
So that's the
Exactly.
Tulsi special, which we love to see.
Yeah.
But that's all
Yeah.
the time we have here for Ask the Capologist. Hart, those were great answers. Hopefully, the fans who are listening got a better understanding of some of the salary cap nuances and some of the CBA language that they didn't understand before, because I think that's the kind of the goal of this is to help inform. And like we mentioned, free agency coming at us Tuesday, July 1st. Hart's going to be on the Daily Faceoff live. And then we're going to do a recap show the night after on Tuesday night, recapping some of the big moves. Hopefully, we can talk more of that Mitch Marner deal. Hopefully, he doesn't hold us hostage and signs on day one. And then maybe we'll see, if Brad Marchand, Nikolaj Ehlers, Aaron Ekblad, some of those bigger names get signed as well. I think that'll be good talking points. But Hart, thank you for the time. Any final words before we sign off?
Well, great job hosting the show. I'm so happy to have you hosting our show, and yeah, I'm looking forward to coming on with you occasionally, and also watching you with some really interesting guests. So yeah, great job so far with the show. Looking forward to it, and everyone, please, yeah, check out puckpedia.com. We're the most accurate, fastest place to get the information up. We're getting the contract details all the way down to that partial no trade clause in the 7th year. So make sure you check that out. You can comment on signings, comment on trades, and then you can also follow along on social, whether that's Twitter or Instagram. Yeah, please check us out. And as Keith mentioned, like free agency on Puckpedia, that's our Super Bowl. It's our busiest time of the year, our most excited time. So really appreciate everyone joining us for it.
Perfect. Also, subscribe to the YouTube. Hart did mention subscribe to our YouTube. Get all this content. We're excited. But thanks, Hart. Have a good one, and enjoy free agency on Tuesday, your Super Bowl.
PuckPedia.com.